Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of PMD Tea Buyers Club. Today we're giving you a bit of behind the scenes look into how we maintain consistency across the company. Now when we're buying tea, when we're blending teas, we are looking to have the same taste and flavour in the cup of tea so that you as the consumer have the same taste and flavour of tea when you buy tea today, whether you buy tea in 6 months, whether you have bought tea before, you get the same taste and same flavour. Now obviously this is very hard to do with tea because tea, it doesn't work to a recipe like, let's say, Coca-Cola, where you're mixing sugar and water and you've got a specific amount of everything that you add. Tea is working with the weather, it's working with the flora, it's working with the people. There's so many factors that change the flavour of a tea. And just because you visit a tea estate, that tea estate will not make the same tasting flavour of tea, 2 days in the week. It will certainly not make the same taste and flavour of tea, in January that it will again in April. There's so many climatic factors that will affect it. So how do we maintain consistency? Well, I've got two teas here. One is, they're both new Vithanakanda teas. One is a tea that was purchased previously, and this is the current tea that we have got on offer on the website and across the company right now. Now, we always keep a sample of the previous tea and the current tea, and when we come to purchase the next tea, we'll also have that, and we'll remove this sample out of the mix because this will be our standard, but I always like to keep them just for us to look through what we've got. Now, the first thing that we do when we're looking to buy any tea is we look at the leaf appearance. This is key. We look at leaf appearance, we look at infusion, and then we finally look at cup color, but we'll come on to these. Now, when we're looking at leaf appearance, with a tea like this, what am I looking for? Well, this is a Flowery Fannings Extra Special grade of tea, which means that it has, if I show you the leaf here, if I bring this up to the screen, you can see that it's got this tippy leaf that's littered through the black leaf. Now, what am I looking for in a tea like this? Well, obviously I've got the first standard of tea here. I'm looking for a similar standard of leaf. It must look the same. Now, this is the current standard of leaf. Now, we got this when we were on New Vithanakanda earlier on in January. When we visited them, we looked at buying some New Vithanakanda tea. It wasn't right. It didn't taste the same. The leaf looked the same, but the final cup color wasn't the same. And that was due to the climatic conditions that they had had 3-4 weeks prior. So we, took back this sample. We said, look, this is the flavor that we want to hit again, and we had them make that. So in this sample, again, what are we looking for? Similar leaf style, nice black leaf. There isn't any stalk. Sometimes you get a bit of stalk through this, but New Vithanakanda have color separators that allow some of that stalk to come out. And again, I'm looking to see, does it have a similar amount of tip? And actually, these two teas do have the same amount of tip. The more tip you add into a grade like this, the lighter your tea will be. The tip gives a bit of lightness, so that will affect the final cup colors. That's why we want to have a similar amount of tip in both teas. The more black tea that you have in this and the less tip, the darker your cup will be. The more tip that you have in it, the lighter your cup will be. So in terms of leaf, both leaves look the same, so I'm happy with this aspect of it. One other thing to do when you're sort of looking at this, bear in mind this sample is a little bit older, so it won't have the freshness that you'll find in this, is to run your nose over the actual tea, and here you can actually smell that caramel flavour coming straight off. Now this is quite an old sample, but this is what it is when you buy good tea, and you look after your tea properly, you keep it stored well, you will still maintain certain degree of freshness to it. Still getting that caramel flavor. Here, what do you smell? Well, if we pull this one up, what do we get? Much more of a freshness. Obviously, this is a much newer sample of tea. This is over a year old actually, but much more fresher, very caramel, big sweetness coming through. A very nice leaf, very, very nice leaf. So on these two aspects, they match. What is next? What do we look for next? Well, we always discuss this and we always say in the tasting room, we don't eat the infusion, but the infusion gives you a very good idea of how well a tea is made. And one of the characteristics that we're looking for when we're looking at infusion is the tea coppery? Does it have a bright coppery infusion to it? What does that tea look like? Now, I've got This is the old Vithanakanda. I'll give it a quick smell. And again, you're getting a big, sweet, plummy caramel aroma coming through with that. This one, even more. I think here you get a bit more of a little bit of an oaky smell coming through. Just smells a lot fresher. The flavors just feel a bit more crisper here. But are the two infusions similar? Now, if I hold that up against the light, they are similar. They both have that coppery look to them. This one, of course, has a little bit more, but we're not comparing tea to tea. We're looking, does this match against that? And this is a little bit more coppery, which means that it's actually slightly better tea. Obviously, you've got to factor in that this tea is a little bit older. So yes, that matches. Smell-wise, really, really good smell. Typical of New Vithanakanda, that sweetness, that caramelness. And essentially, every time I smell this, it actually takes me back to going on to New Vithanakanda bungalow for the first time when I went on, because the bungalow sits above the factory. And I remember the first time I walked on to that bungalow after visiting the factory, the smell that lingers in the bungalow is the smell that you get in this cup. That caramel sweet aroma that you get here is what you have inside that bungalow, and that comes from the withering troughs that sit at the top of the factory. And that is one smell that always takes me back to New Vithanakanda. The final thing that we want to look for, and this is really where you as the consumer kind of, judge it on. You're not looking so much at the leaf, you're not looking so much at the infusion, is the final cup color now, and the final taste. So looking at the two cups, they are similar in color. This one looks slightly darker to me. This one looks ever so slightly darker. There's a little bit of a golden rim. There's a golden rim in this as well. And finally, it'll come down to taste. So I expect this tea to be just slightly off the mark because the sample is older. We don't know how much air has been in it. Slightly older, so you can't draw a direct comparison. But let's have a taste. A very nice tea. Very nice tea, full of caramel aromas. If you haven't tried this tea, guys, try this. Full of caramel aromas, nice juiciness around your mouth, leaves the mouth with a bit of a thickness as well. A very well made tea, and actually surprisingly, how well this tea has kept. When you keep your tea in airtight containers, if you use the foil pouches and you make sure you seal them properly, your tea will keep well. It's when you leave it open, that's when moisture sets in, that's when it loses its freshness. And surprisingly, still a very nice tea, really on point and very nice. Now, how does the new sample taste? Well, like I said, it's a bit thicker in cup. Let's have a taste. A very nice tea. Very nice. Flavors are a bit more crisper. Much more of a nicer round feel in the mouth. A little bit more thickness there. But really giving that sort of caramel flavor to come through. This is a lovely, lovely tea. And this tea took some time to get to. I remember being on New Vithanakanda that we in fact did a hand blend actually of this tea and said, look, this is what we want to do. I think there was about 3 or 4 different samples that we've tried to get this kind of flavor to come through, but this is essentially what we would be looking for. Before we get to that hand making stage, this is what we look for. Is the leaf similar? Are the infusions similar? Does the cup look similar? And finally, how does it taste? Now, there is no way that you will actually ever match 2 teas to be exactly the same for all the factors that I gave you at the beginning. The climatic factors, there's so many things that will affect how a tea tastes. So we're never trying to get 2 teas to be exactly the same. And we always give ourselves a 5% gap, between where we can be, above it and below it, because you'll never hit the exact point of what the tea was before when you bought it. So we're always giving ourselves a 5% gap, and this actually meets well within that, well within that. This is probably, I would say, 2% better than this tea. An amazing tea. If you haven't tried New Vithanakanda, try it. It's one of my personal favorites, which is probably why I've sat here and talked to you about it again. and I will catch you on the next episode of the PMD Tea Buyers Club.